Dateline, Manti Messenger, January 15th, 1943. Quote, genuine cause for satisfaction with their important part in the war effort was given to employees of the parachute company in Manti recently when the company received a letter of appreciation from 2 cadets whose lives were saved by standard parachutes. The parachute worn by one cadet was manufactured in Manti, the other in the San Diego plant. C.E. Fauntleroy, head of the parachute company, said that the company frequently receives such letters of thanks. He is quoted as saying that these letters are especially gratifying because we realize that the men who are wearing our parachutes have very little time to write to the manufacturer when they are engaged 24 hours a day in defending their country. Undoubtedly, every employee in the plant has had a hand in manufacturing some parachutes which served its purposes adequately and satisfactorily as the one worn by Cadet Packard when he was forced to make an emergency jump. End quote. I'm Wendy. This is Demolish Salt Lake and the story of the Standard Parachute Company of Utah. Hello and welcome to episode 11. Our road trip destination for this episode is Manti, Utah, located in Sanpete County, about 125 miles south of Salt Lake City. I have deep roots in Sanpete County, and it's a pretty special place for me. My great-great-grandparents emigrated to Sanpete County from Denmark in the 1800s. Many generations of my family called it home, including my dad, who was born and raised there. That's why this story is so special to me. It's not only part of my family's history, but also the story of some kick-ass women who contributed to the war effort. So let's talk about them. A bit of background on Sanpete County. In June 1849, Ute Chief Walker invited Brigham Young, the founder of Salt Lake City and then president of the Mormon Church, to send a group of settlers to join the encampment of Chief Sanpete's people in central Utah. On October 28th of that same year, 224 men, women, and children headed to what Brigham Young had called Manti. Chief Sanpete's name was modified to Sanpete and became the name of the county where Manti was located. A large group of Danish converts to the Mormon Church emigrated to Manti in 1853 and became the second largest ethnic group to settle in central Utah. In the coming years, more immigrants from Switzerland, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and Great Britain would make Manti their home. Most people know Manti from its Mormon temple. The Manti Temple was built on a 27-acre hill above the city. It was dedicated in 1888 and was the third temple to open in what would become Utah. My grandpa used to call it the Winchester Cathedral because of, quote, all the shotgun weddings that took place there, end quote. I want to concentrate on a lesser-known part of Manti's past. Raise your hand if you knew that Manti had a parachute manufacturing plant ran mostly by women during World War II. I'm guessing that not that many hands went up. Until 2019, when I read about the demolition of the building, I had no idea it existed either. But as you will see, this story is much more than just the manufacturing of parachutes. When World War II came to America with the bombings at Pearl Harbor, Utah's Governor Herbert B. Maw sought out war contracts to help boost an economy still reeling from the Great Depression. Hearing that a parachute company out of California was looking to expand their operations, he jumped at the chance to convince them to set up shop in Sanpete County. He even offered up the armory in Manti for the operation. Why Manti? Well, Maw felt that the people of Sanpete County were one of the hardest hit by the Depression and felt the plant would have enormous economic and social impacts on the community. Later, he would say that the plant was a lifesaver for the people of Sanpete County. James M. Russell of the Standard Parachute Corporation opened the Standard Parachute Company in San Diego, California, with Colonel Cedric Errol Fauntleroy and John Speaks in 1940. Wooed by Governor Maw, Fauntleroy, his 2 daughters, and dog moved to Manti to oversee the Standard Parachute Company of Utah. This was a private company with government contracts to manufacture parachutes for the armed forces from April 1942 to July 1944. Now, you would think that the plant would be a welcome sight, but not everyone was in favor. Probably the biggest critic was the LDS Church. Women working outside of the home was taboo, and the parachute plant was built with the intention of women working and managing it. The Relief Society magazine, an LDS magazine for women, published several articles in 1942 about this concern. Some of these articles stated, quote, "It is bad enough to lose the father, brother, or even the sister out of the home. But when the mother leaves, a home ceases to be a home," end quote. And, quote, "This trend of women to leave the home is certain to create many problems of domestic adjustment and child management. Divorce may increase and also juvenile delinquency," end quote. And finally, quote, "If a mother is capable of doing only one job and doing it well, then it should be the job of a mother," end quote. Others thought differently. An excerpt from a 1942 article in the same magazine stated, quote, "A mother cannot be expected to remain at home to care for her children if the assistance granted is so meager that it does not provide the basic essentials of living, when she can earn an adequate living in war production and at the same time satisfy her desire to be of service to her country. Whatever the motive that promotes a mother to work, her first duty is to her home and children," end quote. So women working outside the home wasn't the only opposition. Community members complained about the lack of rental housing and the high cost of rent. Even those outside of Sanpete County complained that this particular plant would not be helpful to the people of Manti, and that industries like this should be placed in larger cities to benefit the greatest amount of people. Despite all this controversy, Manti and the surrounding communities grew to support and admire the women working in the plant. For some women, especially those with a family, it wasn't easy to juggle working a shift with all the responsibilities of home. After working a full day, they would head home to make dinner, clean the house, do laundry, work on the farm, and complete other chores. Extended family or other children would watch the little ones while the mothers worked. Some women split childcare with fellow workers. The women who worked the first shift would look after the children of those that worked the second shift, and vice versa. Other help with childcare came in the form of a Work Progress Administration-sponsored nursery school that had opened in the basement of the Manti Public Library back in 1940. The nursery was open from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. for children ages 2 to 6. The cost was 40 to 50 cents per day, which was less than the 75-cent average cost in other parts of the state. It was only open to children of wage-earning mothers. Even with all this help and support, some women had to quit the factory due to limited resources for childcare and other family responsibilities, which was a big enough problem for Fauntleroy that he complained to Governor Ma about the loss of employees. Although the majority of workers came from Sanpete and nearby Sevier County, some came from other counties such as Emory and Carbon. This was anywhere between a 1 to 3 hour drive depending on where they lived in those counties. The plant did have a bus that picked up workers in Fountain Green, Moroni, Mount Pleasant, Fairview, Spring City, and Chester. Another bus went to Salina in nearby Sevier County. The bus rides were long, taking up to an hour to complete the entire route. Women also carpooled. One group of women rode together from Fountain Green to Manti in a hearse, calling themselves the, quote, hearse gang, end quote. So with all of this to deal with, why did women choose to work at the plant? Well, remember, the country was coming out of a depression, and small towns like Manti that relied heavily on agriculture were struggling. A weekly paycheck brought more stability than income earned by farming. Some women were widowed or divorced and needed the income to provide for their families. Others were not married, didn't have children, or had grown children, so the stigma of working outside the home wasn't as great for them. It was also steady work without needing any experience. And then there was the sense of fulfilling their patriotic duty to support the war effort. In the end, the women who worked at the factory were hailed as heroes. The plant opened April 10, 1942. The initial building was in the Manti National Guard Armory at 50 East, 100 North. It was built between 1936 and 1938. It was one of 232 buildings constructed in Utah under the Works Progress Administration. This was one of 9 armories built through the program. The building was constructed of stone and finished with cement plaster. The architect was Niles P. Larson of Salt Lake City, who, in addition to designing a bunch of other armories throughout the state, also designed the Manti Theater, the modified facade of the Tower Theater in Salt Lake City, and the Hellenic Orthodox Church in Price, Utah. The armory was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in April of 1986. The Sanpete Parachute Workers Association was organized with Reva Anderson as president to negotiate hours and wages for employees. The plant was staffed and managed mostly by women. However, there were some men who worked as mechanics and security. Ages of employees ranged anywhere from 16 to 40. The first shift started at 6 a.m. and ended at 2:30 p.m., and the second shift ran from 2:45 p.m. to 11:15 p.m. Workers were paid based on a sliding scale. Women making less than 3 parachutes per day earned 40 cents per hour. 3 parachutes per day earned 42 cents per hour. 4 earned 45 cents, and 5 earned 47 cents per hour. Those who made 6 or more were given a bonus of 50 cents per chute with a max hourly wage of $1. Bonuses were given at Thanksgiving and Christmas. An article from the Manti Messenger dated October 15, 1943, stated that Christmas bonuses would be paid on the following schedule: $100 for employees with continuous service for 6 months or longer, $60 for employees with 3 to 6 months continuous service, and $40 for those under 3 months continuous service. In addition, there would be a Thanksgiving bonus of $8 for all workers. The job of the women was to produce and repair individual cargo and bomb parachutes. Now, I couldn't find any description of how the inside of the plant was set up, so going off of pictures, it looks like there was a couple dozen long tables with 5 built-in sewing machines, as well as several other long tables for various uses. Parachutes are long, so long tables were necessary to lay out the parachutes for assembly, inspection, and packing. There were a couple hundred women working in the space every day, so no doubt it was a very busy place. The number of employees started at around 150 in the beginning and peaked at about 450, which was significantly less than Fauntleroy had hoped. He actually wanted to see 1,200 women working 3 shifts a day at the plant. The plant quickly outgrew its space, and in 1942, a large 1-story brick building was constructed on the south side of the armory at the cost of $100,000, which the state of Utah financed. This new space was about 4 times the size of the armory and made room for more sewing machines, office space, and a cafeteria. A grand opening of this new addition happened on October 24, 1942, with speeches, a barbecue, and a dance. It was reported that up to 3,000 people attended this event. The plant didn't employ women, over 40, or those with disabilities because of the insurance liability. But that didn't stop Fauntleroy from finding a way for these women to help. He asked one of his employees, Lilla Keller, to head up a group completely separate from the company. With the help of Governor Ma and an attorney, she set up the Independent Parachute Company. This group worked out of the LDS Bishop Storehouse, which was near the plant. Each morning, piecework was divided up equally among the women, and once their pile was finished, they were done for the day. Women were paid by the piece instead of an hourly wage. I also found instances where women worked on pieces in their own home instead of working at the storehouse or the plant. The women took their work on the parachutes very seriously. They knew they had to pay close attention to their project and inspect the parachutes meticulously because one mistake could result in a soldier being killed. One of my favorite things the women did was put notes to the soldiers in the parachutes. The notes would say something like, "My name is so-and-so and I live in Manti, Utah, and I made this parachute so you could return home safely." Sometimes they even received letters back. Fauntleroy passed along one letter that read, quote, "The company has been advised that Sergeant W.R. Shaman of Hobbs Flying Field recently made a successful emergency jump in standard parachute number 42-193179, which was made here in the Manti plant. You will be especially glad to hear of his safe landing because you worked on this particular parachute. We are proud as I am sure you will be, that your work has saved the man who is prepared to give his life in defending you and the rest of us on the home front." End quote. For the most part, women found the working conditions favorable. The plant was closed on Sundays, which allowed them to attend church. The Manti Messenger stated that the factory was, quote, "Utah's cleanest, most pleasant war production plant," end quote. Every 2 hours, the women had a 10-minute break as well as a lunch break. There was a cafeteria where the women could buy lunch or eat what they brought from home. Mostly the women complained about the noise and the heat. It was very hot in the plant. But they especially enjoyed the social aspect of working at the factory. Many spent time together outside of work and developed close friendships that lasted the rest of their lives. Now, Fauntleroy did find a way to gain favor with the local Relief Society. He donated a large sum of money for a new hospital in Mount Pleasant. This is just one example of his contribution to the community, some of which he did anonymously. Others began to see their opposition wasn't as founded as they thought. One example was at a Christmas party for the Independent Parachute Company when an employee's husband said, quote, "I want you all to know, and I'm ashamed to admit it, but I was very opposed to Myrtle going to work. I wanted her home. It didn't seem right to have her gone every day. She told me it would only be in her spare time. I could see she had made up her mind, so I gave in, and she happily joined her friends. I began to see something else, and that was how much my dear wife had spoiled me." End quote. An article in the Manti Messenger from April 3, 1944, featured a statement by John D. Numa, plant supervisor, that read, quote, "When the war is ended, every worker at the Manti Parachute Plant can feel a direct contribution to that day, and the women of the Independent Parachute Workers Association can feel a special pride in their enterprise and faithfulness to the duty in aiding to this work." End quote. The women did a variety of things with the money they earned. Many used it to upgrade their homes with such things as lighting, indoor plumbing, indoor bathrooms, upgrades to their kitchens such as refrigerators and washers, and purchase new furniture. Others used the money to pay for basic needs such as rent and groceries. For some, they now had a bit of spending money to buy clothes or other personal items they desired. One of the single women purchased a 1941 Hudson Coupe, which she was very proud of. In June 1944, it was announced the plant would close, and many began to worry about the fate of the plant. But an article in the Manti Messenger dated June 30th, 1944, stated that Reliance Manufacturing Company of Chicago had purchased the plant, and it would continue fulfilling war contracts and in peacetime would manufacture textile items sold by national companies such as Big Yank shirts, trousers, and jackets, Yankshire coats, Happy Home frocks, Kate Whitney dresses, Ensenada slacks and sportswear, Ensenada sports shirts, Miss Yank slacks and Jeep suits, A1 shirts, Universal pajamas, No Terry shorts, Penrod shirts for boys, and Yank Junior boys wear. Manti would be the location of its 23rd plant, and it would be called the Wasatch Plant. Not much would change with the Reliance takeover, except for the shift hours, which changed to 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and 4 p.m. to midnight. The Manti Messenger in July 7, 1944, printed an article entitled "Survey Shows Women Intend to Stay at Jobs" that stated, quote, 2 out of every 3 women war workers will be in the post-war competition for peacetime jobs, according to preliminary returns in a survey by Northwestern National Life Insurance Company. End quote. Now, this was true of the workers at Manti. There was very little turnover after the war ever ended, and many women continued to work at the plant for many years to come. The women were proud of themselves and the work they had accomplished. A few oral histories collected stated, quote, "I felt like I was doing some good for the men in the war. This way we could help out too," end quote. And "I'd like to go in on my own time and catch up on those repairs because it made me sick to see them all piled up," end quote. Another stated, quote, "I have spent my whole life in that type of work and I haven't been sorry," end quote. Still, another worker stated that she was, quote, "proud to send those parachutes off," end quote. With the end of World War II in September 1945, Reliance shifted the production from parachutes to jackets. The post-war plans for the plant called for 260 women and 40 men between the ages of 16 to 50, and an intense push to recruit new workers was launched to fill all these new job openings. To help with this recruitment, Reliance released a series of ads featuring an animated sewing machine with the head of a young woman named Rosies. An ad in the Manti Messenger from November 1945 featuring Rosies stated in part, quote, "Reliance is a great place to work. Take it from an old-timer. Music while you work, good pay plus a new incentive wage plan that gives you a chance to earn extra money every week, and vacation with pay plan. Reliance is friendly, a pleasant place to put in your time, and the work is light. Even if you hadn't had experience, you can earn while you learn and work. Come in and see us. Our welcome mat is out for you. Be seeing you, huh? Yours, Rosies, Reliance Manufacturing Company," end quote. Now, Reliance didn't stick around long. By 1947, it was decided that the Wasatch plant wasn't profitable any longer. Carlisle Manufacturing Company bought the plant in 1950 and started working on government contracts making shirts. By 1953, Carlisle had 300 employees working on 240 machines, producing about 3,000 shirts per day. It was the largest single employer in Sanpete County. In 1961, the Manti Improvement Business Association and local women's club collected donations to purchase and remodel the building in order to lease it to a clothing manufacturer. Their work paid off, and the Pacific Trail Sportswear began operation later that year. An article in the Manti Messenger from December 1960 boasted about a huge banquet hosted for the 250-plus workers by Edward Carlisle, plant owner and manager. During the party, employees were praised for their work, and he assured them, quote, "The problem in the Manti plant would not be a lack of market for jackets, but rather the problem of supplying for the demand," end quote. The jackets made at the plant were sold at such stores as JCPenney, Sears, and Montgomery Ward. Now, it was at this same time that the armory and the plant were separated in both ownership and use. The connecting doorway between the two buildings were sealed off, and the buildings were considered to be independent of each other, occupying separate parcels of land. Pacific Trails operated in the building until the early 1980s, when Pike Manufacturing Company took over. Anyone remember Pikette stores around Salt Lake in the 80s and 90s? Yep, same company. Unfortunately, Pike filed for bankruptcy in the mid-1990s. And on March 6, 1995, the 84 employees, some of whom had worked for Pacific Trails, were laid off. Pike would be the last company to occupy the building that had seen almost continuous manufacturing since 1942. Its fate was up in the air until 2019, when Sanpete County asked for $19 million to build a new courthouse on the site. In late November of that same year, bulldozers began the demolition of the old parachute plant. But it wasn't just this building. The armory also came down as well. In short order, we lost two historic Manti buildings filled with incredible history. At a recent family reunion, I asked my family members if they had remembered the parachute factory, and was surprised to hear them say things as, "Oh, I worked there when it was owned by Reliance, or Carlisle, or Pacific Trails." Really, I had no idea the impact of the parachute plant and subsequent plants had on the women of Sanpete County. My family showed me their scars from the machines. They talked about making dresses, blankets, and other clothing from the leftover fabric. My grandmother worked for Pacific Trails, and we have 2 blankets she made from the leftover nylon fabric. One of them is hands down the best camping blanket ever. Listening to their stories made me so proud of the women back in 1942 who set an example for generations to come. I feel very privileged to help tell their story. This episode is dedicated to my Uncle Craig, who passed away in June. He loved the podcast and was one of my biggest supporters. He was born in Sanpete County and spent some of his life there, and would have really enjoyed hearing about the parachute plant. Miss you, Craig. Check out my Instagram and Facebook pages at Demolished Salt Lake Podcast to see pictures of the plant. If you're on Twitter, why not follow me at DemolishedSLPod? And if you like the podcast, please subscribe. Join me next time when we head north to Ogden, Utah to learn about the history of the Ogden stockyards. We'll see you then.